On my first day as CEO of Meridian Industries, I discovered my cheating ex-husband was the company's marketing director, the same man who had brazenly brought his mistress to our 10-year anniversary dinner just 3 months earlier. He froze when he saw me in the lobby, his coffee cup slipping from his fingers and shattering on the marble floor. His shock only deepened when I walked into the executive boardroom not as a visitor, but as his new boss. Walking through the gleaming glass doors of Meridian Industries headquarters that morning, I felt my heart racing, not from nervousness, but anticipation. The security guard smiled warmly as he handed me my temporary badge. I traced my fingers over the simple printed title, New Executive Orientation. If only Robert knew what that orientation really meant. The towering skyscraper in downtown Seattle housed one of the most prestigious technology firms on the West Coast. Meridian had built its reputation on innovation and cutting-edge solutions. But behind closed doors, industry insiders whispered about internal struggles and leadership challenges. Challenges that the board had specifically hired me to address. Smoothed down my charcoal gray suit, purchased specially for this day, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls. The woman staring back at me bore little resemblance to the broken person who'd sat across from Robert at Bellissimo Restaurant 3 months ago, watching in stunned silence as he introduced his executive assistant Vanessa as something clearly more. The woman in the mirror now stood taller, her eyes held steel, and her shoulders carried the confidence of someone who had transformed devastation into determination. 28th floor, the elevator announced pleasantly. The doors slid open to reveal a bustling corridor of Meridian's executive suites. Various employees hurried past, some casting curious glances my way. They'd been buzzing about the mysterious new CEO for weeks, though only the board knew her identity. I caught fragments of whispered conversations as I passed. "Did you hear about the morning meeting? Something big's happening at 9:30. Robert's been insufferable all week." Perfect. The rumor mill was already churning, creating exactly the atmosphere I'd anticipated. I made my way to the Human Resources Department where a professional woman named Eleanor greeted me. "Welcome to Meridian, Ms. Winters. Let's get your orientation started," she said with a knowing wink. She was one of the few who knew my true position. Through the glass walls of the adjacent conference room, I spotted him. Robert stood there in his expensive Italian suit, commanding attention from his team with that familiar, arrogant stance. His perfectly styled hair and designer watch screamed of success, but I knew better. His image had been built on stolen ideas and broken promises. "Catherine?" The sound of my name in his voice startled me from my observations. Robert approached, his signature smirk playing across his lips. The same smirk he'd worn when he'd callously introduced Vanessa at our anniversary dinner. "Well, what a surprise," he continued, his eyes flicking to my temporary badge. "Finally decided to get back into the corporate world?" "Robert," I replied coolly, noting how his wedding band had been replaced by a tan line. "I didn't expect to." "See you here?" "That's Mr. Winters in the office," he corrected, straightening his silk tie. "I'm the marketing director, and you?" He glanced at my temporary badge, his smirk widening. "Are in orientation." Well, everyone has to start somewhere. Nearby, employees pretended not to listen, but their typing had suspiciously slowed. I smiled, politely, letting him savor what he thought was his moment of superiority. The antique clock on the wall showed 9:15 a.m. In exactly 15 minutes, everything would change. "I'm looking forward to the morning meeting," I said casually. "I hear there are some interesting announcements planned." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Good. Let him wonder." "New hires don't typically attend executive meetings," he said, his voice carrying that familiar condescending tone I'd endured throughout our marriage. "Exceptions can be made," Eleanor interjected, appearing at my side. "In fact, Catherine needs to head up now. The board is waiting." Robert's eyebrows furrowed slightly. The board? Don't worry, Robert, I said, gathering my portfolio. Everything will make sense very soon. As I walked toward the executive conference room, I could feel his eyes following me. The weight of my real employee badge, the one announcing me as Chief Executive Officer, felt heavy in my blazer pocket. In my leather portfolio lay the documentation of every questionable decision Robert had made in his department, every marketing campaign he'd claimed credit for that others had actually created, every policy he'd bent to serve his own advancement. The board had been quite interested in my detailed analysis of the department's vulnerabilities, particularly given my unique insight into the man running it. They'd been even more impressed by my proposals for restructuring and my track record of turning around failing marketing divisions at my previous firm. The conference room doors loomed ahead, and through the glass I could see the board members assembling. They nodded respectfully as I approached. Behind me, I heard Robert's expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor. He'd followed, curiosity apparently getting the better of him. "After you, Mr. Winters." I gestured to the door, my voice carrying a hint of authority that made him pause. The next 15 minutes would change everything. The carefully constructed facade Robert had built would crumble, just as he'd once shattered my world that night at Bellissimo. But unlike him, I wasn't here for destruction. I was here to rebuild, not just my life, but an entire company that had suffered under the toxic leadership of people like my ex-husband. As we settled into the conference room, my mind drifted to that devastating night 3 months ago. The memory was crystal clear. Sitting at our usual table, sipping champagne, expecting to celebrate a decade of what I thought was a loving marriage, only to have my world imploded when he arrived with Vanessa on his arm, brazenly announcing their connection, as if I should somehow understand or approve. The chairman's voice snapped me back to the present. "Before we begin, I believe we have some introductions to make." He smiled warmly in my direction. "Ms. Winters, would you like to do the honors?" I stood, smoothing my blazer with steady hands. The fear and helplessness I'd felt that night at the restaurant had been replaced by a calm certainty. Robert sat across from me, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning realization as I pulled out my real employee badge. "Thank you, Chairman Daniels," I began. "For those who don't know me, I'm Catherine Winters, your new Chief Executive Officer, and we have some serious changes to discuss." The sharp intake of breath from Robert's direction was just the beginning. The real work, transforming Meridian Industries into something worth being proud of, was about to begin. The atmosphere in the conference room brought me back to that rainy Friday evening 3 months ago, the night my world imploded. I'd been excited all day, carefully preparing for what I believed would be a celebration of our decade together. Robert had texted that morning, "Table reserved at Bellissimo, 8 p.m. Wear that blue dress I love." I smiled at his thoughtfulness, assuming he remembered it was the dress I'd worn on our first date. The prestigious Bellissimo restaurant overlooked Elliott Bay, its panoramic windows framing the Seattle skyline like a postcard. I arrived early, wanting everything to be perfect. The maitre d' led me to our table, the best in the house with a corner view of the water. I ordered Robert's favorite Cabernet Sauvignon to be ready when he arrived and touched the small anniversary gift in my purse, a vintage watch I'd spent months tracking down, similar to one his grandfather had owned. While waiting, I reflected on our journey together. We'd met at business school, two ambitious students with big dreams. After graduation, Robert had pursued marketing while I climbed the corporate ladder in operations management. We'd supported each other's careers, or so I thought. In recent years, he'd grown distant, blaming late nights on demanding clients and market pressures. I'd believed him, trusting that our foundation was solid despite the growing gaps in our communication. At 8:20, Robert finally walked through Bellissimo's doors. My smile froze when I saw he wasn't alone. A tall, striking woman with auburn hair followed close behind him, her hand resting casually on his arm. I recognized her immediately. Vanessa Chambers, his executive assistant whom I'd met at the company Christmas party 6 months earlier. "Catherine, sorry we're late," Robert announced, not sounding sorry at all. "Traffic from the office was terrible." I stared in confusion as he pulled out a chair for Vanessa before seating himself. The waiter approached with the wine I'd ordered, and Robert nodded approval, seemingly oblivious to the bewilderment on my face. "Is everything okay?" I asked carefully, watching Vanessa make herself comfortable at what was supposed to be our anniversary dinner. Robert took a long sip of wine before answering. "Actually, Catherine, I've been meaning to talk to you about some changes." He reached across the table, not for my hand, but for Vanessa's. "Vanessa and I have developed a connection that goes beyond professional boundaries." The restaurant's ambient noise faded to a distant hum as I processed his words. "A connection," I repeated flatly. "We didn't plan for this to happen," Vanessa offered, her voice carrying practiced sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns." "On our anniversary," I stated, not a question, but an acknowledgement of the calculated cruelty of his timing. Robert shrugged, the gesture dismissing 10 years of marriage as casually as sending back an unsatisfactory appetizer. "I thought it would be more efficient this way. We're all adults here." Efficient. That single word crystallized everything wrong with our marriage. I'd become another item on his schedule, a task to be handled with maximum efficiency. "How long?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Does it matter?" Robert replied, signaling the waiter for menus. 8 months, Vanessa answered simultaneously, a small competitive edge in her voice suggesting she wanted me to know she'd had him while he was still coming home to me. The waiter returned, his professional smile faltering as he sensed the tension. "Would you like to hear tonight's specials?" "Yes," Robert said, as if we were having a perfectly normal dinner. "And bring another glass for my colleague." Colleague. Not mistress, not girlfriend, not even the woman he was leaving his wife for. Just colleague. That evening progressed in a surreal haze. I sat through a 3-course meal watching my husband and his mistress share inside jokes and casual touches. Robert ordered extravagantly, premium steaks, seafood towers, another bottle of wine, putting everything on our joint credit card. At one point, Vanessa excused herself to the restroom, and I seized the moment. "Why bring her here tonight? Why not just tell me privately?" Robert leaned back, swirling his wine with the detached interest of someone observing an experiment. "I wanted you to see that this is real, not some fling you could talk me out of. Vanessa understands the corporate world in ways you never did. She's ambitious, connected, strategic. And I wasn't those things." The question escaped before I could contain it. "You were always too ethical for real success, Catherine. Too concerned with process and fairness. Business requires a certain flexibility with principles." He checked his watch impatiently. "The truth is, you've reached your ceiling. Some people are meant for leadership, others aren't. You're not a natural leader. You never have been." When the bill came, he handed the waiter our joint card without even looking at the total, over $600 for my public humiliation. As we prepared to leave, Robert finally delivered his coup de grace. "I'll be moving out tomorrow. I've already signed a lease on a condo downtown. You'll need to start figuring out how to cover the mortgage on your own. My lawyer will contact you about the divorce." "What about our savings?" I asked, sudden financial panic cutting through the emotional numbness. Robert's laugh held no humor. "What savings? The market's been difficult lately. Investments don't always perform as expected." The implications of his statement hit me like a physical blow. I'd trusted him to manage our joint finances while I focused on my career. How much had he hidden from me? How much was even left? "I've left some paperwork on my desk at home," he added, helping Vanessa with her coat. "It will explain the financial situation. You might want to consider downsizing." As they walked away, Robert turned back with one final assessment. "You'll never survive the corporate jungle, Catherine. You're too soft, too trusting. Always have been." Chairman Daniels's voice pulled me back to the present moment. "Ms. Winters has provided our board with an exceptional analysis of Meridian's market position and organizational challenges." He distributed folders containing my strategic assessment and turnaround plan. Her insights into our marketing division were particularly illuminating. I watched Robert flip through the document, his face paling as he recognized his own projects laid bare. The inflated metrics, the claimed successes that data didn't support, the credit taken for team members' work. Each page revealed another layer of the facade he'd constructed. "These reports show a concerning pattern of misrepresentation," I stated, my voice calm and authoritative, "particularly in how campaign results were presented to the board and how team contributions were attributed." Several board members nodded, having already reviewed my findings in private sessions before approving my appointment. Robert's face flickered between shock and anger as he realized what was happening. "This is absurd," he interrupted. "These interpretations are completely accurate," completed Miranda Jeffries, the board's most senior member. "We've had independent analysts verify every finding. The patterns are undeniable, Mr. Winters." Robert's gaze darted around the table, searching for allies and finding none. The politics he'd played, the favors he'd traded, the relationships he'd cultivated, all worthless in the face of concrete data and unified board determination. "Catherine," he began, his tone suddenly conciliatory, "there must be some misunderstanding between us." "That's Ms. Winters or CEO Winters in this setting, Mr. Winters," I corrected, echoing his earlier condescension. "And there's no misunderstanding. The data speaks for itself." As the meeting continued, I outlined my vision for Meridian's future: transparent reporting, collaborative innovation, ethical marketing practices that built genuine customer trust. With each point, I could see Robert's carefully constructed world crumbling, just as he had once shattered mine. The same skills he had dismissed as weaknesses, my attention to detail, my emphasis on ethical practices, my focus on team building, had become the very qualities the board sought in their new leader. The woman he claimed would never survive the corporate jungle now controlled the ecosystem he'd exploited for years. Before I share the rest of what happened in that boardroom, I want to take a moment to connect with you, my viewers. I see from your comments on my previous videos that many of you have experienced similar betrayals, perhaps not as dramatic as having your spouse bring their lover to your anniversary dinner, but painful nonetheless. Life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. If you're watching this from a place of hurt or uncertainty, know that your story isn't over. Mine certainly wasn't, even when it felt like it was. While I'm recording this from my corner office with a view of the Seattle skyline, just 3 months ago, I was sitting on my kitchen floor surrounded by financial documents I barely understood, wondering how I would make my next mortgage payment. If this story resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Tomorrow's video will reveal exactly how I transformed my marketing expertise into a strategic weapon that not only saved my financial future, but revolutionized an entire company culture. I've received thousands of messages asking for this specific roadmap, and I promise to share every detail. Now, let's return to that pivotal morning at Meridian Industries, where Robert was just beginning to understand the true consequences of his actions. The executive boardroom fell into uncomfortable silence as board members reviewed my analysis of the marketing department's performance. Through the glass walls, curious employees gathered in small clusters, sensing the unusual tension in what was supposed to be a routine morning meeting. "These metrics show a systematic pattern of overstated results," I continued, highlighting specific campaigns from the past fiscal year. When adjusted to reflect actual conversion rates rather than potential reach, we see a performance decrease of approximately 32% across all major initiatives. Robert's face flushed red as I methodically dismantled the illusion of success he'd carefully constructed. Robert's face flushed red as I methodically dismantled the illusion of success he'd carefully constructed. These are industry-standard projection models, he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Perhaps in 2010, responded Miranda Jeffries, tapping her fountain pen against the spreadsheet. Current best practices require much more transparent attribution modeling. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a side-by-side comparison of reported results versus actual performance. What's particularly concerning is this pattern of claiming personal credit for team innovations. Several successful campaign elements originated from junior staff members, whose contributions were systematically minimized in official reports. Heads turned toward Robert, whose confident posture had collapsed into defensive rigidity. The same man who had sat across from me at Bellissimo with casual cruelty now seemed smaller somehow, his expensive suit no longer projecting authority, but instead looking like an unconvincing costume. "This is absurd," he finally managed, gathering his notes with trembling hands. "These accusations are clearly motivated by personal vendettas. Catherine and I have recently separated, which she failed to disclose to the board during her interview process. A brief glance between board members told me they'd anticipated this exact defense." "Mr. Winters?" Chairman Daniels replied calmly. "Ms. Winters disclosed her personal connection to you in her first interview. Unlike you, she believes in transparency. That disclosure prompted us to have 3 independent consulting firms verify her analysis before proceeding with her appointment. Their reports are included in the appendix of your packets." Robert flipped frantically to the back of his folder, where the consultant's signatures and credentials were clearly displayed beneath conclusions that matched my own. I watched realization dawn across his face. This wasn't a hasty decision, made by a gullible board. This was the culmination of weeks of careful investigation, triggered by my insights but verified by respected industry experts. Furthermore, I added, my experience with Mr. Winters' personal financial management gave me reason to examine certain departmental expenditures more closely. I changed slides to display a chart of marketing budget allocations over the previous 18 months. You'll notice several consulting payments to Phoenix Creative Solutions, a company that, until recently, had no website, no office address, and only one client, Meridian Industries. The CFO leaned forward, eyes narrowing. We were told Phoenix was a boutique agency specializing in emergent market dynamics. Phoenix Creative Solutions was registered as an LLC 9 months ago, I explained. Its sole owner is Vanessa Chambers, who, coincidentally, joined the marketing department as Mr. Winters' executive assistant 10 months ago. A murmur spread through the boardroom. Robert's face had gone from red to ashen. Ms. Chambers has received consulting payments totaling $157,000 over the past 3 quarters, primarily for strategic advisement and market intelligence. I continued. When requested yesterday, she was unable to produce any deliverables justifying these payments. I paused, letting the implications sink in. This wasn't just about Robert's affair or his cruelty toward me. This was about systematic abuse of company resources and trust, behaviors that threatened Meridian's integrity and financial health. We've frozen all payments to Phoenix Creative Solutions pending a full forensic audit, the CFO announced. And Ms. Chambers has been placed on administrative leave effective this morning. I nodded acknowledgement, then turned to face Robert directly. This isn't personal, Mr. Winters. This is business. Something you taught me the importance of at our anniversary dinner. Robert's mouth opened and closed without producing words. The man who had always had a clever response, a smooth explanation, a calculated strategy, found himself utterly speechless. Now, I continued, addressing the entire board, let's discuss how we move forward. My 90-day plan addresses not just the marketing department's issues, but integrates solutions across our entire operational structure. For the next 30 minutes, I outlined my vision for Meridian Industries, a transparent, collaborative culture built on accountability and innovation. As I spoke, I could see board members' expressions changing from skepticism to consideration to active engagement. Even those who had initially questioned appointing an outsider as CEO began nodding in agreement as I addressed the specific challenges they'd been struggling with for years. The marketplace doesn't need another tech company focused solely on quarterly results, I explained. It needs companies building sustainable value through genuine innovation and ethical practices. With Meridian's foundational technology and the right leadership approach, we can reposition as industry leaders in both product excellence and corporate culture. By the time I concluded my presentation, Robert had shrunk into his chair, the reality of his situation finally settling in. His former wife, the woman he'd dismissed as too soft for leadership, was now effectively his boss. The career he'd built through manipulation and false credit now lay exposed before the people whose opinions mattered most. "I believe we've heard enough," Chairman Daniels announced. "Unless there are further questions for Ms. Winters, I suggest we move to implementation." Discussions. As board members gathered their materials, their decision was clear without requiring a formal vote. My appointment wasn't just being confirmed, it was being enthusiastically embraced. "Robert," Miranda Jeffries addressed him directly, "remain after the meeting. We need to discuss your transition." His eyes darted to mine, silently pleading for intervention, for mercy, for the softness he had once mocked. I maintained professional composure, neither celebrating his downfall nor offering rescue. "Mr. Winters will report directly to our new Chief Operating Officer during the restructuring period," I stated, my voice betraying no emotion. Given his institutional knowledge, there's value in a properly managed transition. As the board members filed out, many stopped to welcome me officially to Meridian. Through the glass walls, I could see the news already spreading through the office. Employees huddled around smartphones, reading the company-wide email that had just announced my appointment. Some looked shocked, others curious, and a few wore unmistakable expressions of relief. Robert remained seated, staring at the presentation still displayed on the screen, his professional facade methodically dismantled in 18 precise slides. "Inucal won't get away with this," he finally muttered, quiet enough that only I could hear. I gathered my materials calmly, the same way I'd gathered my dignity that night at Bellissimo. "I already have," I replied. "The difference is I'm doing it legally and ethically." The hours following that pivotal board meeting unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of change. The 28th floor of Meridian Industries transformed into a hub of urgent activity as news of the leadership transition spread throughout the company. As I walked toward what would soon be my office, the corner suite that had previously belonged to the outgoing CEO, I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes following my movement. Eleanor from HR appeared at my side, matching my stride with practiced efficiency. "Security has been notified about Mr. Winters' new access limitations," she murmured, "and IT is transferring control of all executive systems to you as we speak. Your biometrics have already been added to the secure floor access points." I nodded, observing the shifting dynamics around me. Employees who had previously averted their gaze when passing executives now watched openly, their expressions ranging from curiosity to cautious hope. Through the glass walls of the marketing department, I spotted several team members huddled together, smartphones in hand, likely dissecting the company-wide announcement that had just hit their inboxes. "Ms. Winters," a hesitant voice called from behind me. I turned to find a young woman clutching a tablet, her professional demeanor barely masking her nervousness. "I'm Alyssa Chen from the creative team. I know this is unorthodox, but I've been developing a campaign concept that Mr. Winters repeatedly rejected. I believe it could significantly outperform our current direction, and I was hoping, email me the full presentation." I replied, handing her my new business card. If the data supports your concept, we'll discuss implementation. Creative solutions should be evaluated on merit, not office politics. The relief on Alyssa's face was immediate and profound. As she hurried away, I noticed several other employees watching the exchange with newfound interest. Small moments like these would be crucial in dismantling the culture of fear Robert had cultivated. My new executive assistant, Marcus, greeted me at the entrance to the CEO suite. Unlike Vanessa, who had been hired for her appearance rather than her qualifications, Marcus held an MBA from Stanford and had previously supported C-suite executives at 2 Fortune 500 companies. "Your afternoon has been structured as requested," he explained, handing me a meticulously organized portfolio. "The executive team is assembled in Conference Room A for introductions. Department heads have individual meetings scheduled throughout the day, and IT security is waiting to brief you on system vulnerabilities. Also," he lowered his voice slightly, "Ms. Chambers attempted to access the building this morning but was denied entry per the board's instructions. Security has retained her company devices for the forensic audit." "Thank you, Marcus. Has Mr. Winters cleared his belongings from the marketing director's office?" "He's currently being escorted through that process," Marcus replied, his professional tone revealing nothing about how he felt regarding these dramatic developments. The spacious CEO office bore the impersonal touches of its previous occupant: generic, modern art, standard executive furniture, and not a single personal photograph or memento. It would need transformation to reflect my leadership philosophy, but that could wait. I settled behind the expansive desk and opened my laptop, reviewing the files I'd prepared for each upcoming meeting. Through the glass walls, I spotted Robert, being escorted to his new office, a standard workspace on the 24th floor, far from the executive suite he'd coveted. His Italian suit looked suddenly ill-fitting, his confident stride reduced to a stiff walk. Security Chief Alvarado followed at a respectful distance, ensuring the transition remained professional. The executive team filed into Conference Room A, precisely at 11 a.m. Their faces reflected a mixture of uncertainty and calculation as they assessed their new leader. Most had been handpicked by the previous CEO, their loyalty carefully cultivated through years of political maneuvering. They would be evaluating every word, every decision, looking for weakness or opportunity. "Thank you all for adjusting your schedules," I began, standing at the head of the table rather than sitting, a subtle but important signal about the changing power dynamics. "I understand leadership transitions create uncertainty, particularly unexpected ones. Let me be clear about my immediate priorities: operational transparency, merit-based advancement, and rebuilding market trust through authentic innovation." I moved directly to the digital display, bringing up a comprehensive organizational assessment I'd prepared over the previous weeks. This analysis identifies several critical vulnerabilities in our current structure. Rather than assigning blame, we'll focus on implementing solutions. Each of you will receive specific objectives aligned with your department's role in our overall transformation. Derek Collins, the Chief Technology Officer known for his territorial protection of resources, leaned forward with a practiced smile. "With all due respect, Ms. Winters, significant structural changes typically require lengthy transition periods. Perhaps a more gradual approach would allow these vulnerabilities to persist while we study them to death," I finished for him, my tone pleasant but firm. Meridian has spent 3 years in gradual decline while our competitors have rapidly evolved. Our market position doesn't afford us the luxury of hesitation. I clicked to the next slide, which displayed the company's declining performance metrics against industry benchmarks. These numbers weren't fully disclosed in previous executive reports, but they tell a compelling story about where we're headed. Without immediate intervention, the room fell silent as the executives studied data many of them had never seen presented so directly. The previous CEO had carefully filtered information, showing each department only isolated metrics that didn't reveal the complete picture. "How did you access these integrated datasets?" asked Sofia Rodriguez, our chief financial officer, her expression a mixture of professional admiration and concern. Some of these correlations were restricted to specific security clearances. The board granted me comprehensive access during the evaluation process, I explained. Which brings me to my second priority, dismantling unnecessary information silos. Effective today, all executive decisions will be made with complete data transparency between departments. I could almost see the mental calculations happening behind their eyes. How this would affect their carefully guarded departmental territories, which power dynamics would shift, where new opportunities might emerge. Each of you will be evaluated based on a single primary metric, your measurable contribution to Meridian's overall success. Not your department's isolated performance, not your political alliances, not your historical position, your actual impact on our collective goals. Michael Barnes, the seasoned VP of Global Sales, studied me with newfound respect. Refreshingly direct, he commented. But implementation will face significant resistance from middle management. Those layers have been cultivated specifically to maintain the status quo. Which is precisely why our restructuring begins with a comprehensive middle management assessment, I replied, clicking to the next slide. Starting tomorrow, every team leader will participate in a performance and alignment review. Those who demonstrate adaptability and merit will thrive in our new structure. Those who've advanced through politics rather than performance will need to either evolve or explore opportunities elsewhere. By the end of the hour-long meeting, the atmosphere had transformed from skeptical assessment to cautious engagement. Even those executives most loyal to the previous regime could recognize the strategic soundness of my approach, whatever their personal reservations might be. As they filed out, Sofia Rodriguez lingered behind. Once we were alone, her professional mask slipped slightly. The Phoenix Creative Solutions discovery, that was impressive investigative work. Robert's financial manipulations were buried deep in segmented budget allocations. I nodded, acknowledging her subtle message. As CFO, she must have had suspicions about those payments but had been unable, or perhaps unwilling, to challenge Robert's protected position under the previous CEO. Financial transparency will be a cornerstone of our new operational approach, I replied. I'd appreciate your insights on implementing those controls effectively. A genuine smile replaced her guarded expression. I've had improvement proposals ready for 2 years. No one would listen. I'm listening now, I assured her. Looking through the glass walls toward the main floor, I watched as employees returned from lunch, their movements and interactions subtly different than just hours earlier. News traveled fast in corporate environments. The atmosphere had already begun shifting from one of cautious self-protection to tentative possibility. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Mr. Winters has cleared his office. Security reports he attempted to download certain files but was blocked by the new access protocols. He's requested a meeting with you before leaving the building. I considered the request for a moment before replying. Schedule him for 4:30 p.m. His building access will be permanently deactivated at 5 p.m. This wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries, consequences, and establishing clear expectations for the new Meridian culture. The man who had callously discarded our marriage and manipulated company resources would receive professional courtesy. Nothing more, nothing less. As I prepared for my next meeting, I glimpsed my reflection in the office windows. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to the shell-shocked wife who had sat across from Robert and Vanessa at Bellissimo 3 months ago. That night had broken something fundamental in me, but in the breaking, it had revealed stronger materials beneath: resilience, strategic thinking, and an unwavering commitment to ethical leadership. Sometimes, I reflected, we discover our true capacity only when everything we thought defined us is stripped away. The day after our devastating anniversary dinner, I sat alone in our spacious Mercer Island home, surrounded by financial documents I barely understood. What had started as a simple search for our joint account statements had evolved into an archaeological dig through layers of financial deception. I'd always trusted Robert to manage our investments while I focused on building my career. That trust had proven catastrophic. Our main checking account, which should have held nearly $30,000 in emergency savings, showed a balance of $738.42. The investment portfolio that Robert had claimed was worth over $800,000 had been systematically liquidated over the past year, with transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. 3 new credit cards had been opened in my name, each maxed to their $25,000 limits. A second mortgage had been taken against our home 4 months earlier. The signature on the documents looked like mine, but wasn't. The methodical dismantling of our financial life was breathtaking in its calculation. This wasn't impulsive or recent. This was strategic financial sabotage executed over months while he smiled across the dinner table each night, asking about my day. My phone buzzed with another text from Robert. "Movers coming tomorrow at 9. Be there or don't. Your choice." No acknowledgement of the financial wasteland he'd created. No explanation for the missing money. No concern for how I would survive the aftermath of his betrayal. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I calculated my monthly expenses against my income. The mortgage, even before the second lien, had been a stretch on our combined salaries. Now, with just my income from Preston Dynamics, where I'd recently been passed over for promotion in favor of my less qualified male colleague, the numbers were impossible. As tears blurred my vision, my phone lit up with an unexpected name, Elise Harrington, my former mentor from business school. We hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years, but she'd always had an uncanny sense for when former students were in crisis. "Catherine, I just heard through the alumni network about Robert. That absolute bastard. Are you okay?" The kindness in her voice broke whatever composure I had left. Between sobs, I explained not just the public humiliation of the anniversary dinner, but the financial devastation I discovered in its wake. "Where are you now?" she asked, her voice shifting from sympathy to strategic concern. "At home, trying to make sense of these financial statements. Elise, I think he forged my signature on loan documents. There's at least $300,000 missing, possibly. More. Stay there. Don't touch anything else. I'm bringing someone to see you." 3 hours later, Elise arrived with Miranda Jeffries, whom I recognized as one of Seattle's most prominent corporate attorneys. I'd read about her work representing whistleblowers in financial misconduct cases, but had never expected to need her services personally. Miranda surveyed the documents spread across my dining room table with the calculated precision of a battlefield, commander assessing terrain. "Identity theft, forgery, financial fraud, and that's just from what I can see here," she noted, taking photographs of key documents with her phone. "You've got a strong case for criminal charges if you want to pursue that route." The thought of a public legal battle made my stomach clench. "I just want to survive this. Our home will go into foreclosure within months at this rate." Miranda and Elise exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. "There's another approach we might consider," Elise said carefully. "One that addresses both your immediate financial situation and creates a more satisfying long-term resolution." She explained that Miranda sat on the board of Meridian Industries, where Robert had recently been promoted to marketing director. The company had been struggling with leadership issues, particularly in departments where style had been prioritized over substance. "The board has been searching for a new CEO for months," Miranda explained. "Someone with both technical knowledge and the emotional intelligence to rebuild a fractured corporate culture. Your background in operational transformation at Preston Dynamics has been impressive, despite their failure to properly recognize your contributions." I stared at her, wondering how she knew about my work. "I haven't applied for any positions at Meridian." "Not yet," Elise smiled. "But your resume has been sitting in my exceptional talents file since you revolutionized Preston's supply chain 3 years ago." "Catherine, You've been underestimating yourself professionally for years, probably because Robert continuously undermined your confidence while taking credit for your strategic thinking in his own career." Miranda nodded agreement. "The board is particularly interested in leaders who can identify organizational vulnerabilities and implement ethical corrective measures. Your experience with Robert's tactics gives you unique insight into exactly the kind of behaviors our company needs to eliminate." The implication of what they were suggesting slowly crystallized in my mind. "You want me to apply for the CEO position at Meridian, where Robert works?" "We want you to interview for it," Miranda corrected. "Whether you're ultimately selected will depend entirely on your qualifications and vision for the company. But yes, the poetic justice aspect hasn't escaped our notice." For the first time in 24 hours, I felt something other than despair. Flicker of possibility, of agency reclaimed from the ashes of betrayal. He said I'd never survive in the corporate jungle, that I was too soft, too ethical for real success. Elise's expression hardened. Men like Robert consistently mistake ethical leadership for weakness. They don't understand that truly sustainable success requires both moral courage and strategic vision. You have both in abundance, Catherine. Over the next 2 weeks, I divided my time between 3 critical tasks: documenting Robert's financial fraud for potential legal action, continuing my work at Preston Dynamics while quietly preparing my exit, and developing a comprehensive analysis of Meridian Industries' market position and internal challenges. The last task proved most illuminating. As I researched Meridian's public financial reports, press releases, and product launches, patterns emerged that echoed Robert's personal behavior. Marketing claims that exceeded actual capabilities. Short-term tactics prioritized over sustainable growth. Flashy promotions of innovation that delivered minimal actual value. Using skills I'd developed, transforming Preston's operations, I constructed a detailed assessment of Meridian's vulnerabilities and opportunities, with particular focus on their marketing department, Robert's domain. My analysis identified specific campaigns where reported metrics appeared artificially inflated and budget allocations that showed questionable distribution patterns. When Miranda secured me an interview with Meridian's board, I arrived with more than a resume and standard responses about leadership philosophy. I brought a comprehensive diagnostic of their company's issues and a strategic roadmap for transformation. The board's reaction exceeded even Elise's optimistic predictions. "This level of insight into our challenges is remarkable," Chairman Daniels had commented, reviewing my analysis, "especially from someone outside the organization." "I specialize in identifying systemic vulnerabilities," I replied carefully. "Your marketing department's current approach shows particular patterns that concern me." That initial interview led to 2 more increasingly focused discussions, culminating in a final presentation to the full board. Throughout the process, I maintained absolute professionalism regarding my connection to Robert, addressing it factually when asked, but never letting it become the focus of my candidacy. "Your personal relationship with our marketing director raises obvious concerns," one board member had noted during the final interview. "I understand those concerns," I'd responded. "They're precisely why I've provided third-party verification for all my analytical findings. My assessment of Meridian's challenges isn't based on personal history, but on objective metrics and established best practices. Judge me on the quality of my insights and the viability of my proposed solutions." 3 days later, Miranda called. With the news, the board had voted unanimously to offer me the CEO position, with an accelerated start date. The transformation from shell-shocked wife to corporate leader had taken exactly 23 days. The night before my first day at Meridian, I stood in my closet selecting my outfit with strategic precision. Not the soft, approachable styles Robert had always encouraged me to wear, but a sharply tailored charcoal suit that communicated authority without apology. As I laid out each element of my professional armor, My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard rumors about a new CEO starting tomorrow. Board's been unusually secretive. Whatever desperate has been they've chosen, they'll regret. Not consulting the marketing department first. We make or break executive reputations around here. I recognized Robert's arrogant tone immediately, though not the number. He'd clearly acquired a new phone after I'd blocked his previous one. I didn't respond, simply screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Miranda with the note. Additional evidence of the cultural issues we discussed. Her response came seconds later. The board has approved your full restructuring plan, effective immediately upon your formal introduction tomorrow. Sleep well, CEO Winters. For the first time since that devastating night at Bellissimo, I did exactly that, dreaming not of revenge but of transformation, both personal and professional. The woman Robert had dismissed as too soft had metamorphosed into something he never anticipated. A leader with both the ethical compass he lacked and the strategic vision he only pretended to possess. Tomorrow would be about more than personal vindication. It would be about creating something powerful and positive from the ruins of betrayal. The afternoon following the board meeting unfolded in a series of strategic encounters that would set the tone for my leadership at Meridian Industries. Each meeting, each decision, each small interaction would create ripples throughout the company culture. I was acutely aware that employees would be watching everything: how I handled Robert, how I communicated priorities, how I responded to the inevitable resistance to change. My first departmental meeting was with the marketing team, Robert's domain. I had deliberately scheduled it before my private meeting with him, ensuring I would connect with his team members without his mediating presence. The spacious conference room fell silent as I entered, 23 faces turning toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension. Thank you all for adjusting your schedules, I began, choosing to stand rather than sit at the head of the table. I recognize that leadership transitions create uncertainty, particularly unexpected ones. Let me be transparent about what this means for your department. I moved directly to the digital display and brought up a slide showing the marketing department's reported metrics alongside actual performance data. The discrepancy was immediately apparent to everyone in the room. These gaps represent something I call the perception premium, the difference between how we've presented our performance and what we've actually delivered. My first priority as CEO is eliminating that gap across all departments, starting with marketing. A young man near the back raised his hand hesitantly. Ms. Winters, those reporting structures were mandated by Mr. Winters. Many of us raised concerns about the methodology, but were discouraged from pursuing those questions. The careful phrasing told me everything about Robert's management style. I understand, which is why this conversation isn't about assigning blame, but about implementing solutions. Starting today, all marketing metrics will be reported using industry-standard attribution models, without modification or strategic interpretation. Relief visibly washed over several faces around the table. These were professionals who had been forced to compromise their integrity to maintain their positions. I recognized the emotional toll such compromises extracted. I had experienced them myself at Preston Dynamics. Second, we're implementing a new project attribution model. All team members who contribute meaningfully to campaigns will receive proper credit in both internal documentation and client presentations. The practice of concentrating recognition at the leadership level while minimizing junior contributions ends today. Alyssa Chen, the creative team member who had approached me earlier, straightened in her chair. Does this mean our internal campaign submission process will change as well? Currently, all concepts require director approval before even being tested with focus groups. Excellent question. Effective immediately, we're implementing a blind review system for campaign concepts. Ideas will be evaluated based on strategic merit and potential ROI, not on who proposed them or their alignment with existing hierarchies. For the next 45 minutes, I outlined specific changes to departmental structure, reporting relationships, and performance evaluation metrics. With each point, I could see the team's energy shifting from wary assessment to cautious optimism. These weren't arbitrary changes. They were solutions to problems they had experienced daily, but had been powerless to address. Finally, I want to address the elephant in the room, I said, moving to my last slide. Yes, Robert Winters and I have a personal history. That history informed my understanding of certain organizational dynamics, but is not driving my decision-making. Judge me by the results of the changes we implement together, not by assumptions about my motivations. As the meeting concluded, I noticed small groups immediately forming, voices animated in discussion about the implications of these changes. The culture was already beginning to shift, even in these early hours. Marcus appeared at my elbow as I left the conference room. Mr. Collins from Technology and Ms. Rodriguez from Finance are waiting in your office. They've requested a joint meeting before their individual scheduled sessions. Interesting. The CTO and CFO seeking a private audience together suggested either an alliance forming or existing issues they felt needed immediate attention. Either way, their initiative was worth accommodating. Clear 15 minutes for them now, I instructed, and ensure Robert's 4:30 meeting remains the last appointment of my day. Derek Collins and Sophia Rodriguez stood as I entered the CEO's office, their body language suggesting a unified front, despite their historically contentious relationship. Derek had always fought for expanding technology investments, while Sophia maintained strict budgetary controls. Thank you for seeing us, Sophia began once the door closed. We've been discussing your transparency initiatives and realized there's a situation you should be aware of immediately, rather than discovering it through the formal audit process. Derek nodded agreement. The previous CEO authorized a proprietary project management system that Robert championed last year. The implementation costs were segmented across multiple budget categories to minimize visibility of the total investment. $4.2 million for a system that duplicated functionality we already had through licensed enterprise software, Sophia added, sliding a folder across the desk. The vendor was Nexus Integration Solutions, a company with limited history and only one major client, us. I opened the folder to find documentation of the project, including signature authorizations and implementation timelines. Let me guess, another shell company connected to either Robert or Vanessa? Nexus is owned by Maxwell Grant, Derek explained. Robert's college roommate and best man at your wedding. The sophistication of Robert's financial manipulation was even greater than I had anticipated. He hadn't just channeled company funds to Vanessa through Phoenix Creative. He had established an entire ecosystem of fraudulent vendor relationships. The system was implemented despite significant technical concerns from my team, Derek continued. It's created workflow inefficiencies and security vulnerabilities we've been trying to address for months. Robert blocked every attempt to conduct a performance review of the platform. We've been documenting these issues, Sophia added, but the previous CEO consistently sided with Robert. Their relationship went back 20 years. I studied both executives carefully, assessing their motivations. While the information they provided aligned with patterns I'd already identified, their eagerness to implicate Robert so quickly warranted careful consideration. Why bring this to me directly, rather than waiting for the audit to reveal it? I asked. They exchanged glances before Derek responded. Because we've been trying to fix this for 8 months without success. If you're serious about transformation, we want to be part of the solution, not viewed as complicit in the problem. Sophia nodded agreement. There are other issues similar to this throughout the organization. The previous leadership created a culture where raising concerns was career suicide. If that's changing, we want to establish that we're aligned with the new direction. Their strategic positioning was transparent, but not necessarily insincere. Corporate survivors learned to align themselves with shifting power dynamics while protecting their own interests. The key was distinguishing between those who adapted out of mere self-preservation and those who genuinely sought positive change. "I appreciate the initiative," I replied, closing the folder. "This information will be incorporated into our comprehensive vendor audit. I'll need complete documentation of all communications regarding this system, including any instances where concerns were raised and dismissed." "Already compiled," Sophia confirmed, along with financial impact assessments and security vulnerability reports. "One more question," I said as they prepared to leave. "If you've both recognized these issues for months, why did it take a leadership change to prompt this disclosure?" The uncomfortable silence that followed revealed more than their eventual responses. "The previous structure didn't reward ethical concerns," Derek finally admitted. "Quite the opposite. And those who challenged Robert's initiatives found themselves marginalized or eventually forced out," Sophia added. 6 department heads have left in the past year alone." After they departed, I reviewed the Nexus integration documentation more carefully. The technical specifications were deliberately obscured by jargon, the financial arrangements structured to evade standard procurement oversight. Robert's digital signature appeared on approval forms alongside those of the former CEO and 2 board members who had recently resigned. The scale of the deception extended far beyond personal betrayal or the relatively modest schemes involving Vanessa's consulting fees. This was systematic corporate fraud that had compromised Meridian's financial health and technological infrastructure. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Mr. Winters is requesting to move his meeting earlier. Says he has an unavoidable conflict at 4:30. I thought about Robert's habitual manipulation of schedules and boundaries, how he had always expected others to accommodate his preferences regardless of inconvenience. It was a small control tactic, but one that revealed his fundamental belief that his time and priorities outweighed everyone else's. "Meeting remains as scheduled," I replied. "If he cannot attend at 4:30, we can reschedule for tomorrow morning." The response came swiftly. "He insists on today and says the board would expect you to make time for a department director with urgent concerns." "The board fully supports my scheduling priorities," I countered. 4:30 or tomorrow morning. His choice. Setting boundaries was more than a personal necessity. It was an essential component of the cultural change Meridian needed. Every small interaction would either reinforce the old power dynamics or establish new expectations. The afternoon continued with department meetings, each revealing new layers of the dysfunctional culture Robert had helped cultivate. Team members, who had been silenced, were finding their voices, often tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as they realized their insights were genuinely valued. Through the glass walls of various conference rooms, I occasionally caught glimpses of Robert moving through the office, his body language shifting from his usual commanding presence to increasingly agitated movements. The corporate ecosystem was realigning around new realities, and he was rapidly discovering his diminished position within it. At precisely 4:30, Marcus escorted Robert into my office. The man who had once dismissed me as too soft for leadership now stood before me, his expression an uncomfortable mixture of anger and calculation. "Catherine," he began, deliberately using my first name despite the professional context. "This theatrical power play has gone far enough. We need to discuss a reasonable transition that doesn't disrupt the entire organization." I gestured toward the visitor's chair, maintaining professional composure. "Please have a seat, Mr. Winters. We have much to discuss about your role during this restructuring period." Robert remained standing, ignoring my gesture toward the chair. His refusal to sit was a small but deliberate power move, an attempt to maintain physical dominance in a situation where his professional authority had been undermined. "I think we can dispense with the formalities," he said, straightening the cuffs of his tailored shirt. "This vendetta is obvious to everyone in the building. The board may have been temporarily swayed by your performance, but they'll quickly recognize the disruption you're causing. I didn't respond immediately, letting the silence expand between us. Through the glass walls of the CEO office, I could see employees glancing curiously in our direction, aware of the confrontation unfolding but unable to hear the specifics. How I handled this interaction would set a precedent for all future challenges to my authority. "Please sit down, Mr. Winters," I repeated, my voice calm but firm. Corporate security guidelines require all termination discussions to be conducted, with both parties seated and recorded for legal protection. His confident expression faltered. "Termination? You can't possibly—" "Your position isn't being terminated immediately," I clarified, gesturing again to the chair, though that option remains on the table depending on this conversation. "What's ending today is your ability to operate without accountability or oversight." Robert finally sank into the chair, the initial shock giving way to calculated assessment. I recognized this expression from countless negotiations we'd discussed during our marriage. He was recalibrating, searching for leverage. "Catherine," he began, his tone shifting to the persuasive charm he'd often employed during our relationship. "We both know this situation is complicated by our history, but surely we can find a professional resolution that serves everyone's interests. My department has consistently outperformed revenue targets. According to reports you authored, using metrics you designed, with results you calculated," I replied, opening a folder containing the audit documentation. "When evaluated using standard industry benchmarks, your department has underperformed by approximately 23%, while exceeding budget allocations by 31%. I placed 3 documents on the desk between us: the Nexus integration contract, Phoenix Creatives, consulting agreements, and a spreadsheet detailing marketing expense allocations from the past 18 months. Financial forensics has identified $4.7 million in questionable expenditures under your direct authorization. This pattern of financial mismanagement alone would justify immediate termination." Robert's face flushed with anger. "Those expenditures were approved by the previous CEO and the board. You're deliberately misinterpreting standard business operations to fulfill your personal vendetta, which is why 3 independent auditing firms verified these findings before any action was taken," I responded, sliding another document toward him. "Their conclusions were unanimous regarding both the financial irregularities and the breach of fiduciary responsibility." For the first time, genuine concern flickered across Robert's face as he scanned the executive summary from Anderson Consulting. The firm's reputation for forensic financial analysis was unimpeachable, their findings impossible to dismiss as personal bias. "This is a misunderstanding," he insisted, though with less conviction. "Nexus provided proprietary solutions that justified the investment. Maxwell's company was selected through competitive analysis. Competitive analysis that excluded established vendors with superior solutions at lower cost points," I noted. "The documentation shows you personally removed 3 qualified candidates from consideration before presenting Nexus to the approval committee." Robert's jaw tightened as he recognized the thoroughness of the investigation. "You've been planning this for months. While pretending to be devastated by our separation, you were constructing this elaborate trap. The accusation was so fundamentally dishonest that it momentarily took my breath away." This was Robert's most consistent tactic, projecting his own calculated behaviors onto others, transforming his victims into perpetrators. "3 months ago, I was sitting across from you and your mistress at what I thought was our anniversary dinner," I reminded him, my voice steady despite the flash of anger I felt. "I had no connection to Meridian Industries, no awareness of your professional misconduct, and no intention of ever seeing you again. Your actions, both personal and professional, created this situation." I opened another folder and removed a single sheet of paper. "The board has approved 2 potential paths forward. Option 1, immediate termination with cause. forfeiture of all unvested benefits, and potential legal action regarding the financial irregularities identified in the audit. Robert's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrests of his chair. And option 2? Supervised probation with significant restructuring of your role and responsibilities. You would report directly to the new marketing director, who will be appointed next week. Your compensation package would be adjusted to reflect your reduced responsibilities, and you would be required to cooperate fully with the ongoing financial investigation. His expression darkened with each word. You expect me to accept a demotion and pay cut while reporting to whoever you handpicked to replace me? That's professional suicide. That's accountability, I corrected. Something notably absent from your management approach. And yes, the new marketing director will be selected based on merit and leadership capability, not political connections or manipulation skills. Robert leaned forward, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you're doing. I built relationships throughout this organization over years. People are loyal to me, not some outsider brought in through boardroom politics. Those relationships will be tested by what emerges during the financial audit, I replied. Especially when team members realize how your leadership has compromised their professional reputations and potentially their legal standing. I placed a formal letter on the desk between us. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to decide between these options. Security has already restricted your system access to prevent any deletion or alteration of company records. Your company devices will remain in IT's possession during the ongoing audit. Robert stared at the letter, the magnitude of his situation finally registering. The carefully constructed professional facade he'd maintained was crumbling, revealing glimpses of the panic beneath. You can't possibly believe you'll succeed here. You've never led anything larger than a project team. The corporate politics alone will be replaced by ethical leadership and transparent decision-making, I finished for him. Your prediction that I would never survive the corporate world was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what true leadership requires. Manipulation and intimidation aren't leadership skills, Robert. They're shortcuts taken by people who lack the capacity for authentic influence. His eyes narrowed as he recognized his own words from the restaurant being turned against him. This isn't over, Catherine. The board might be impressed with your analysis now, but when results falter under your inexperienced leadership, they'll quickly reconsider. Which is why every decision will be based on measurable objectives and transparent processes, I replied. Success or failure will be determined by results, not perceptions managed through selective reporting and political maneuvering. I stood, signaling that our meeting had concluded. I suggest you use the evening to carefully consider your options. The pathway you choose tomorrow will significantly impact your professional future. Robert remained seated, a final small resistance to the shifting power dynamic. You've changed, he observed, studying me with narrowed eyes. No, I corrected him. I've simply stopped allowing your perception of me to define my capabilities. The woman you dismissed as too soft always had the strength and strategic vision you lacked. The difference is that now everyone else can see it too. As security arrived to escort him from the building, Robert finally stood, his movements stiff with suppressed anger. Through the glass walls, I watched employees quickly avert their eyes, pretending they hadn't been observing the confrontation. Within minutes, rumors of what had transpired would spread throughout the building, shaped by the company's established communication networks. Marcus entered after Robert had been escorted to collect his personal items. The executive team is requesting an update on Mr. Winter's status. Several department heads have expressed concerns about potential disruption to ongoing projects. Schedule a brief executive communication session for 5:30, I instructed. We'll address the transition plan and temporary reporting structures while the new marketing director is selected. As Marcus departed, my phone buzzed with a message. From Miranda Jeffries. Board members receiving concerned calls from Robert's allies, holding firm on our decision, but suggest transparent communication regarding next steps. Damage control may be necessary. The message confirmed what I had anticipated. Robert was already activating his network, attempting to undermine my authority before the ink had dried on my appointment. His approach was predictable, focusing on fear and uncertainty rather than facts. I drafted a company-wide email addressing the leadership transition directly. Meridian Team, today marks the beginning of significant positive changes for our organization. As your new CEO, I am committed to transparent communication, ethical leadership, and a culture where success is measured by meaningful results rather than politics or perception. Some immediate changes are underway in our marketing department, following concerning findings in a recent audit. These changes may cause temporary disruption, but will ultimately strengthen our market position and internal processes. I invite each of you to be part of building Meridian's future. In the coming weeks, I will be hosting open forums where team members at all levels can share insights and concerns directly with executive leadership. My door is open. My expectations are high, and my commitment to Meridian success is unwavering. Catherine Winters, Chief Executive Officer. As I hit send, I watched through the glass walls as employees throughout the office reached for their phones and computers, the message notification creating a wave of simultaneous movement across the floor. Some read with obvious surprise, others with visible relief, a few with concerned frowns. The transformation had officially begun. While Robert was activating his allies among the old guard, I was speaking directly to the broader organization, the talented professionals whose contributions had been minimized, whose concerns had been dismissed, whose potential had been constrained by the toxic culture he had helped create. By tomorrow morning, every employee would have chosen a side in this organizational revolution. Comfort with the dysfunctional status quo or hope for ethical transformation. Those who had thrived through manipulation and favoritism would resist change. Those who had been marginalized despite their talents would embrace it. As the sun set over Seattle's skyline, casting long shadows across my new office, I felt not triumph, but resolve. This wasn't about defeating Robert, it was about creating something better from the ruins of both my marriage and Meridian's compromised culture. The woman he had dismissed as too soft was about to demonstrate what real strength looked like, not the capacity to control or intimidate others, but the courage to stand for integrity even when facing resistance, the vision to see possibilities beyond broken systems, and the resilience to build something valuable from painful experiences. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, watching the city lights flicker to life below, I allowed myself a moment to appreciate how far I had come from that devastating night at Bellissimo. Robert's cruelty had been intended to break me. Instead, it had revealed strengths I never knew I possessed, strengths that would now reshape not just my life, but an entire company culture. The following week at Meridian Industries unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of change. Each day brought new revelations, shifting allegiances, and the systematic dismantling of the toxic culture Robert had helped cultivate. By Wednesday morning, the initial shock of the leadership transition had evolved into something more complex, a company-wide reckoning with both its past practices and future possibilities. Robert had chosen option 2, probation with reduced responsibilities, though not from any sense of accountability. His decision was purely strategic, providing him continued access to the building and his network, while he plotted his countermoves. I had anticipated this choice, knowing his psychological inability to walk away from perceived power, even when diminished. "Mr. Winters has cleared out his director's office," Marcus reported, placing a stack of department reports on my desk. "Facilities has prepared his new workspace on the 24th floor, as specified. Several of his closest allies have requested meetings with you, ostensibly about ongoing projects. Schedule them consecutively on Friday afternoon, I replied, reviewing the latest financial audit findings. After they've had time to observe our initial restructuring announcements. The comprehensive marketing department audit had revealed even deeper issues than initially suspected. Beyond the financial irregularities involving Nexus Integration and Phoenix Creative, we discovered systematic credit theft from junior team members, manipulated performance metrics designed to exaggerate campaign success, and a pattern of promoting employees based on loyalty rather than competence. Most concerning was the discovery of client data being used in ways that violated both our privacy policies and regulatory guidelines. Robert had authorized the collection and application of sensitive information without proper disclosure or security protocols, creating significant legal exposure for Meridian. "Catherine," Sofia Rodriguez appeared in my doorway, her expression grave despite her usual composed demeanor. Legal just completed their preliminary assessment of the marketing department's data practices. We're looking at potential regulatory penalties exceeding $30 million if these violations become public. I gestured for her to enter and close the door. How widespread is the exposure? Limited to specific campaigns or systemic? Systemic, she confirmed, placing a thick folder on my desk. Robert implemented what he called enhanced targeting across all major accounts 16 months ago. The documentation shows he was explicitly advised by legal that these practices violated both GDPR and California's privacy statutes, but he proceeded anyway. I opened the folder to find internal memos that clearly outlined the legal risks, followed by Robert's signed directives overruling the concerns. His handwritten note in the margin of one document read, "Legal always overreacts. The competitive advantage outweighs the minimal risk of detection." Who else knew about this? I asked, scanning the distribution list on the most critical warnings. The previous CEO was copied on the initial advisories but delegated the final decision to Robert. 2 board members were briefed, but apparently accepted Robert's assurances that the concerns were theoretical rather than actual violations. The scope of the ethical compromise extended far beyond Robert's individual actions. The entire governance structure had enabled his approaches through either active support or passive acquiescence. We need a 3-pronged response, I decided. First, immediate cessation of all non-compliant data practices. Second, a comprehensive remediation plan developed with external privacy experts. Third, transparent disclosure to affected clients before anyone else discovers these violations. Sophia's eyes widened slightly. Voluntary disclosure will accelerate recognition of the financial impact. The market reaction could be severe. More severe than if regulators discover it first, or if clients learn about it through media exposure. I countered. This isn't just about financial penalties, Sophia. It's about whether Meridian deserves client trust going forward. She studied me for a moment before nodding. I'll assemble a joint task force from legal, finance, and client services to develop the disclosure strategy. When do you want this implemented? Immediately. Every day these violations continue increases our liability. As Sophia departed, I turned to the windows overlooking Seattle's skyline, considering the broader implications. Robert's approach to both business ethics and personal relationships followed the same pattern: short-term advantage prioritized, over sustainable integrity, with little concern for the damage left in his wake. A message from Miranda Jeffries appeared on my phone. Robert's been calling board members all morning, claiming vindictive overreaction to minor procedural oversights. Daniels and I are holding firm, but 2 newer members seem receptive to his narrative. I wasn't surprised. Robert had cultivated board relationships for years, presenting himself as the dynamic innovator unrestrained by bureaucratic limitations. That narrative worked until the actual costs of his innovation became clear. Sending comprehensive legal assessment of privacy violations with supporting documentation, I replied. These aren't procedural oversights, but systematic ethical breaches with significant legal and financial implications. Throughout the afternoon, department heads arrived with their own discoveries of questionable practices that had flourished under the previous leadership. Michael Barnes from Global Sales revealed commission structures that incentivized short-term deals over sustainable client relationships. Elena Choi from Product Development described how release schedules were manipulated to align with executive bonus targets rather than quality assurance standards. Derek Collins from Technology detailed how security protocols had been compromised to accelerate deployment timelines. The pattern was consistent, a culture where appearance outweighed substance, where short-term gains justified ethical compromises, where challenging, questionable practices led to professional isolation or retaliation. By late afternoon, I received notification that Robert had assembled an informal gathering of his allies in the 24th floor break room. Security reported approximately 15 employees attending, mostly mid-level managers who had benefited from his patronage. The meeting wasn't technically against company policy, but its timing and composition made its purpose clear: organizing resistance to the cultural transformation underway. Should security intervene? Marcus asked when relaying this information. Absolutely not, I replied. Document attendance discreetly, but take no action that could support a narrative of suppression or retaliation. This isn't about silencing opposition. It's about establishing new standards through transparent processes. I understood the psychology at work. Those who had advanced through Robert's system of favoritism and ethical flexibility naturally feared a merit-based culture with clear accountability. Their resistance wasn't just about loyalty to Robert, it was about protecting the advantages they'd gained through alignment with his approach. Late that evening, as most employees had departed, I walked the floors of Meridian unescorted, observing the physical manifestations of the company culture. The executive floor featured expensive modern art and premium amenities, while team workspaces were cramped and utilitarian. Corner offices with spectacular views were assigned based on political rank rather than functional necessity, creating visible hierarchies that reinforced power disparities. Through the glass walls of Robert's former office, now being prepared for the incoming marketing director, I could see the literal symbols of his leadership philosophy: motivational posters featuring wolves and lions, awards prominently displayed without acknowledging team contributions, a seating arrangement that physically elevated his position above visitors. My phone buzzed with an unexpected name: Vanessa Chambers. We hadn't spoken since that devastating night at Bellissimo, and I hesitated before answering. Catherine. Her voice carried none of the confident assertiveness from our last encounter. I've been trying to reach Robert about my company's contract with Meridian, but he's not responding. I was told all Phoenix Creative's payments have been suspended pending investigation. That's correct, I confirmed, maintaining professional detachment. All vendor relationships are under review, with particular focus on recently established firms with limited client portfolios. Her controlled breathing suggested she was trying to manage her reaction. Phoenix has delivered significant value to Meridian's marketing efforts. The suspension of our contract appears punitive and personally motivated. The review is being conducted by independent auditors using objective metrics, I explained. Any vendor whose services demonstrate legitimate value and appropriate pricing will continue their relationship with Meridian, regardless of personal connections. Robert assured me. She stopped abruptly, seemingly realizing the weakness in referencing assurances from a recently demoted executive. Phoenix Creative has proprietary methodologies that justify our compensation structure. I'm sure the audit will reflect that if it's factually accurate, I replied. The findings should be complete within 2 weeks. Until then, all payments remain suspended. After disconnecting, I reflected on the parallel positions we now occupied. Both women whose futures had been shaped by Robert's promises, though in vastly different ways. The difference lay in how we'd responded to the revelation of his true character. While I had rebuilt from the ruins of his betrayal, Vanessa had tied her fortunes more tightly to his manipulative schemes, becoming both beneficiary and victim of his approach. By Friday morning, the company dynamics had visibly shifted. Employees who had previously remained silent in meetings were offering insights and raising legitimate concerns. Teams began collaborating across departmental boundaries that had previously been jealously guarded. The initial fear of change was gradually giving way to cautious optimism, particularly among those whose talents had been undervalued in the previous regime. The board wants an update on the privacy violation remediation, Marcus reminded me as I prepared for my final meetings of the week. Chairman Daniels specifically asked about potential financial impact projections. The comprehensive assessment will be ready Monday morning, I confirmed, including worst case, expected case, and best case scenarios depending on regulatory response to our voluntary disclosure. As I gathered materials for my afternoon meetings with Robert's allies, I noticed a small gathering around Alyssa Chen's desk. The creative team member was presenting concept boards for a campaign unlike anything Meridian had previously produced, authentic, value-focused, and built on genuine client benefits rather than manipulative targeting. Team members from multiple departments were offering suggestions, their collaborative energy palpable even from a distance. The scene crystallized what this transformation was truly about. Beyond addressing Robert's specific misconduct or even repairing the damage from years of compromised leadership, we were creating space for authentic innovation and collaboration to flourish. The company's potential had always existed, merely constrained by cultural toxicity and misaligned incentives. As I watched Meridian's employees beginning to engage with that potential, I realized that transforming betrayal into purpose wasn't just a personal journey. It was a leadership philosophy with the power to heal organizational wounds and create something genuinely valuable from painful experiences. 1 month into my leadership at Meridian Industries, the transformation had progressed far beyond my initial expectations. The physical environment reflected the evolving culture. Walls between departments had been literally removed, creating open collaborative spaces where information flowed freely. The executive floor was being renovated, eliminating the corner office hierarchy in favor of functional workspaces designed around team needs rather than status symbols. The quarterly numbers are in, Sofia Rodriguez announced during our Monday executive meeting. Despite the initial market reaction to our privacy violation disclosure, client retention has exceeded projections by 23%. The transparency approach is working. The statistics told only part of the story. The real transformation was evident in the daily interactions throughout the building. Junior employees who had once remained silent in meetings now confidently presented innovative ideas. Cross-departmental collaboration had replaced territorial protection. Perhaps most significantly, ethical considerations had become central to decision-making processes rather than obstacles to be navigated around. The client feedback surveys show something remarkable, Michael Barnes added, bringing up a chart on the main display. When asked why they're maintaining their relationship with Meridian despite the privacy issues, 87% cited our transparent handling of the situation and clear remediation plan. They're actually trusting us more after the disclosure than before. Robert's allies had largely self-selected out of the organization. Some resigned when their protected positions were eliminated in the restructuring. Others remained but found themselves increasingly isolated as their resistance to collaborative processes became evident. A few had genuinely embraced the new culture, discovering unexpected satisfaction in merit-based advancement and contribution-focused recognition. Robert himself had settled into a peculiar position within the transformed organization. His technical knowledge remained valuable, but his influence had evaporated as the toxic aspects of his leadership style became increasingly apparent to colleagues who had once supported him. He moved through the building like a ghost of the old culture, present but increasingly irrelevant to the company's future direction. Ms. Winters, Marcus appeared at my office door. Mr. Winters is requesting a private meeting. He says it's regarding a personal matter rather than company business. I considered declining, but recognized that unresolved personal issues could potentially undermine the professional transformation underway. Schedule him for 4:30. Ensure security is aware, but discreet. The afternoon brought a succession of positive developments. Alyssa Chen's innovative campaign concept, which Robert had repeatedly rejected, received enthusiastic client approval, with projected returns significantly exceeding previous marketing initiatives. Derek Collins's technology team successfully integrated enterprise systems that had been deliberately kept separate under the previous regime, eliminating redundancies that had cost millions annually. Elena Choi's product development group unveiled prototypes that had been shelved due to Robert's insistence on flashier but less substantive features. At precisely 4:30, Robert entered my office. The transformation in his appearance was striking. The expensive suits and carefully maintained image had given way to business casual attire and a less polished presentation. The physical manifestation of his diminished status was written in every aspect of his demeanor. "Thank you for seeing me," he began, his tone lacking the confident authority that had once characterized his speech. "I'll be direct. The financial situation is untenable. The reduced compensation package doesn't cover the obligations I've accumulated." The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had left me facing financial devastation now sought assistance with his own monetary challenges. "That's unfortunate," I replied, maintaining professional composure. "However, your compensation reflects the assessed value of your current contribution to Meridian. If you feel it's inadequate, the performance improvement plan outlines specific metrics for advancement." His expression hardened. "You know very well that my relegation to this subordinate position makes those metrics unattainable. This isn't about performance. It's about systematic exclusion from opportunities." Every employee at Meridian now operates under the same merit-based evaluation system, I reminded him. The opportunities exist for anyone demonstrating the capabilities and commitment to earn them. Robert leaned forward, his frustration breaking through the professional veneer. "The condo lease is $5,000 monthly. Vanessa's company has lost its primary client. The lifestyle we established was built on financial manipulation and ethical compromises," I finished for him, "both personally and professionally. The current circumstances are the natural consequences of those choices, not the result of vindictive action." He stared at me, momentarily speechless. In his worldview, accountability was something to be imposed on others while evading it personally. The concept that his current situation resulted directly from his own actions seemed genuinely foreign. To him, "What do you want from me, Catherine?" he finally asked, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. "An apology? Public humiliation? What would satisfy this vendetta?" "This isn't a vendetta," I corrected him. "It's a company-wide transformation toward ethical leadership and sustainable success. Your personal financial challenges are exactly that, personal. They fall outside my professional concern as CEO." Robert's expression flickered between anger and calculation. "I still have relationships on the board. People who understand that business sometimes requires flexibility with conventional ethics. This crusade for transparency will eventually run its course when profitability becomes the priority again." I studied him with genuine curiosity. Even now, facing the consequences of his approach, he remained convinced that ethical leadership was merely a temporary inconvenience rather than a sustainable business model. His worldview couldn't accommodate the possibility that integrity and success might be complementary rather than competing values. "The executive meeting this morning reviewed our quarterly performance," I informed him. "Revenue is up 18% since implementing the transparent client relationship model. Employee retention has improved by 34%, significantly reducing recruitment and training costs. Even our stock price has stabilized following the initial drop after our privacy violation disclosure. Each statistic seemed to hit him like a physical blow, challenging the foundational assumption of his leadership philosophy that cutting ethical corners was necessary for business success. If you're genuinely interested in improving your financial situation, I continued, the path forward is clear. Demonstrate actual value through ethical contribution. The same standards apply to you as to every other Meridian employee. As he left my office, his posture communicated defeat more eloquently than words could have. The man who had once commanded attention through intimidation and manipulation now moved invisibly through spaces where authentic collaboration and merit-based recognition had become the new currency of influence. Through the glass walls, I watched as he passed Alyssa's desk, where a team was enthusiastically refining her campaign concept. No one glanced up at his passing, not from fear or deliberate snubbing, but from genuine absorption in work that mattered. His irrelevance to the transformed culture was perhaps the most fitting consequence of all. My phone buzzed with a message from Miranda Jeffries, board reviewing quarterly results tomorrow. Unanimous support for continued transformation initiatives. Your leadership approach is creating the Meridian we always believed was possible. The journey from betrayed wife to transformational leader had unfolded in ways I could never have anticipated. That devastating night at Bellissimo. Robert's cruelty had been intended to diminish me, to reinforce his assessment that I was too soft for real success. Instead, it had catalyzed the discovery of strengths I hadn't recognized in myself. And now, those same strengths were reshaping an entire corporate culture. As the evening light cast long shadows across the transformed office space, I reflected on how thoroughly Robert had misunderstood the nature of true power. He had confused intimidation with leadership, manipulation with strategy, and short-term advantage with sustainable success. The company he had sought to dominate through these approaches was now thriving precisely because those approaches had been systematically eliminated. The revelation wasn't about personal vindication, but about the universal principle at work. Authentic strength never requires diminishing others to elevate itself. The leadership capable of creating genuine transformation comes not from hardening oneself against vulnerability, but from transforming painful experiences into wisdom that benefits everyone. 3 months after taking the helm at Meridian Industries, I stood before a packed auditorium at the Seattle Business Leadership Conference. The invitation to deliver the keynote address had arrived unexpectedly, a recognition of the remarkable transformation that had positioned Meridian as an emerging model of ethical corporate leadership. The conventional wisdom suggests that business success requires compromise, I began, surveying the audience of industry leaders, entrepreneurs, and MBA students eager for insights. That we must choose between profitability and principles, between market advantage and moral clarity. My experience at Meridian Industries tells a different story. The large screens behind me displayed Meridian's performance metrics since implementing our transparency initiatives. Revenue growth, client retention, employee satisfaction, and share price had all improved significantly, defying the predictions that our ethical reforms would undermine financial performance. The question isn't whether ethics are compatible with business success, I continued. The real question is whether success achieved through ethical compromise is sustainable. Data suggests it isn't, not financially, not culturally, and certainly not personally. From my position on stage, I spotted Robert in the middle rows, his presence unexpected and unsettling. He had resigned from Meridian 6 weeks earlier, unable to adapt to a merit-based environment where his political maneuvering yielded diminishing returns. According to industry gossip, he had been struggling to secure another executive position, his reputation tarnished by the well-publicized ethical reforms that had exposed his previous approaches. Transformation begins with transparency, I explained, outlining the systematic changes we had implemented. When we voluntarily disclosed privacy violations that occurred under previous leadership, Conventional wisdom predicted client exodus and market punishment. Instead, we experienced unprecedented client loyalty. They valued honest acknowledgement over continued deception. As I described our internal reforms, collaborative decision-making processes, credit-sharing mechanisms that recognized contributions, at all levels, compensation structures tied to ethical metrics alongside financial ones, I noticed Robert shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Each successful initiative stood as a repudiation of his leadership philosophy. Perhaps most significantly, I concluded, we discovered that the qualities often dismissed as soft in business contexts, empathy, integrity, collaborative spirit, actually create more resilient organizations. The leaders who believe intimidation and manipulation are necessary tools for success have fundamentally misunderstood what true strength looks like in the modern business environment. The standing ovation that followed was gratifying, but secondary to the conversations that emerged during the reception. Industry leaders sought specific insights about implementing similar reforms. Young professionals described toxic workplace experiences and their hopes for healthier alternatives. Investors inquired about correlations between ethical practices and sustainable growth. Robert approached as the crowd thinned, his expression carefully neutral. "Impressive performance," he acknowledged with characteristic calculation. "Though, I notice you didn't mention how these high-minded principles apply to personal vendettas carried into professional settings." "Because they don't," I replied simply. "Every decision at Meridian is based on measurable impact and alignment with organizational values. Personal history might inform understanding, but it doesn't drive decision-making." He studied me with narrowed eyes, still searching for evidence that my success was somehow about him, that the transformation of Meridian had been orchestrated primarily as retribution rather than reform. The narcissism that had defined his approach to both our marriage and his career prevented him from seeing himself as merely one component in a larger systemic change. "I've been consulting with Virotech," he mentioned casually, naming one of Meridian's competitors. "Their board is interested in more pragmatic leadership approaches than your moral crusade." I recognized the implicit threat that he would use his knowledge of Meridian's operations to advantage our competition, but felt no concern. The strength of our transformed organization didn't rely on secrecy or manipulation, but on authentic value creation and ethical client relationships. "I wish you and Virotech success with whatever approach aligns with your values," I responded sincerely. "The market benefits from diverse leadership philosophies. Clients and employees can choose environments that resonate with their priorities." My genuine indifference to his implied threat seemed to unsettle him more than any defensive reaction would have. The realization that his ability to provoke emotional responses had evaporated left him momentarily speechless. As waitstaff began clearing the reception area, Miranda Jeffries appeared at my side. "Catherine, the Forbes reporter is hoping for a few minutes if you're available. They're doing a feature on the relationship between ethical leadership and market performance." I nodded agreement before turning back to Robert. "If you'll excuse me, duty calls." "It won't last," he said quietly as I prepared to leave. "This ethical leadership trend. When market pressures intensify, boards always revert to executives who deliver results without moral constraints." I considered his perspective with genuine curiosity, rather than defensiveness. That assessment assumes ethics and results are opposing forces rather than complementary ones. Our experience at Meridian suggests otherwise. Walking away, I reflected on how thoroughly our paths had diverged since that devastating night at Bellissimo. While I had built something constructive from the ruins of betrayal, Robert remained trapped in the same limited paradigm, unable to conceive of success defined by anything beyond manipulation and self-interest. The transformation wasn't just organizational but deeply personal. The woman he had dismissed as too soft for the corporate world had discovered that true strength comes not from hardening oneself against vulnerability, but from channeling painful experiences into purposeful creation. As I prepared to meet with the Forbes journalist, I realized that the most powerful response to betrayal isn't revenge, but reinvention, not just of circumstances, but of the narrative that gives those circumstances meaning. 6 months into Meridian's transformation, I found myself standing in a familiar setting, Bellissimo restaurant, the scene of Robert's calculated cruelty half a year earlier. This time, however, I wasn't waiting for a husband who would arrive with his mistress. I was hosting Meridian's leadership team to celebrate a milestone that few had believed possible: the company's selection as one of Fortune's most ethical companies, alongside record quarterly results. The private dining room overlooked Elliott Bay, the Seattle skyline, creating a dramatic backdrop for our gathering. As team members arrived, their easy camaraderie reflected the cultural shift we'd achieved. The rigid hierarchies and political maneuvering that had characterized executive interactions under the previous regime had given way to authentic collaboration and mutual respect. To transformation, Miranda Jeffries proposed, raising her glass once everyone was seated. Not just of Meridian's business practices, but of our understanding of what successful leadership looks like. The toast captured perfectly what we were celebrating, not just improved metrics, but a fundamental reimagining of corporate culture. The executives gathered around the table had each played crucial roles in that transformation, some by championing change from the beginning, others by evolving their own leadership approaches as evidence of success mounted. Sofia Rodriguez, once guarded and territorial about financial information, had become an advocate for transparent reporting across departmental boundaries. Derek Collins had dismantled the technology silos that previously protected his power base, creating integrated systems that served overall company objectives rather than departmental fiefdoms. Elena Choi had transformed product development from a top-down dictate to a collaborative process that incorporated insights from client-facing teams. The Forbes profile hits newsstands tomorrow, Marcus mentioned, having graduated from executive assistant to director of communications based on his exceptional strategic thinking. Their analysis suggests Meridian has created a replicable model for ethical transformation that could influence industry standards. The conversation flowed easily between strategic planning and personal reflection, professional achievements, and individual growth. The artificial separation between work personas and authentic selves, another toxic element of Robert's leadership culture, had dissolved in favor of genuine human connection. As dinner concluded and dessert was served, Michael Barnes, our typically reserved head of global sales, cleared his throat for attention. "I'd like to share something beyond our professional success," he began, uncharacteristic emotion coloring his voice. "Catherine, when you first outlined your vision for Meridian, I was skeptical. Not because I disagreed with ethical leadership, in principle, but because I'd seen too many well-intentioned reforms crushed by entrenched interests." Heads nodded around the table, many having shared similar doubts initially. "What I didn't anticipate," he continued, "was how these changes would affect me personally. For 15 years, I succeeded in environments that rewarded political maneuvering over authentic contribution. I became someone my younger self wouldn't recognize, calculating, cynical, constantly armored against vulnerability." The quiet honesty of his reflection held everyone's attention. "Working in this transformed culture has changed more than my professional approach. It's restored parts of myself I thought were permanently lost to corporate survival. My wife recently commented that I've become the person she originally married: present, engaged, capable of bringing my whole self to both work and home." His testimony resonated deeply with others around the table, several nodding in recognition of similar personal transformations. The boundary between professional reform and personal restoration had proven more permeable than anyone anticipated. "The metrics show we've created a more successful company by conventional standards," Michael concluded. "But we've also created Something harder to measure yet infinitely more valuable. A workplace that enhances rather than diminishes our humanity. As conversation continued around Michael's reflection, my attention was momentarily drawn to the main dining room visible through the partially open door. In a surreal moment of synchronicity, I glimpsed Robert being seated at a table with executives I recognized from Virotech. His designer suit and carefully cultivated appearance suggested he was still playing the same character, still operating from the same limited playbook, still believing that impression management constituted actual leadership. What struck me most was not resentment or vindication, but a profound sense of distance. Not just the physical space between our separate dining rooms, but the vast philosophical gulf between our divergent paths. The woman who had once shared his life and believed in his potential now inhabited a reality organized around fundamentally different principles. Miranda followed my gaze and raised an eyebrow in silent question. I smiled reassuringly and redirected our conversation to Meridian's community impact initiatives. Robert's presence registered as information, nothing more. Not threat, not distraction, not emotional trigger. Later, as we prepared to depart, I deliberately chose a route that would take us past Robert's table. Not from desire for confrontation or display, but as a personal milestone in my own journey. Proof that the devastating wound he had inflicted at this very restaurant had truly healed. Our groups passed each other in the narrow corridor leading to the exit. Robert's expression flickered with recognition and something harder to identify. Perhaps regret, perhaps simple calculation. Vanessa, seated beside him, studied her menu with unusual intensity, avoiding eye contact. No words were exchanged, none needed. The contrast between our respective tables told the entire story. Meridian's leadership team moving together with genuine connection and shared purpose versus Robert's carefully orchestrated performance of corporate success. Outside, beneath the clear Seattle night, Miranda linked her arm through mine as we waited for our cars. Full circle moment back there, she observed quietly. How did it feel? I considered the question honestly. Like watching a movie I once found personally devastating and discovering it no longer has any emotional power. The story seems small now, almost predictable. She nodded, understanding. The best revenge really is living well, isn't it? Not. Revenge, I corrected gently. Transcendence. Creating something that makes the original injury seem almost irrelevant in comparison. As we dispersed into the evening, each returning to lives enriched rather than diminished by our professional endeavors, I realized how thoroughly Robert had failed in his assessment that night 6 months ago. The qualities he had dismissed as weaknesses, empathy, integrity, collaborative spirit, had proven to be my greatest strengths as a leader. The woman he claimed was too soft for the corporate world had not only survived but transformed an entire organization by bringing precisely those supposedly soft qualities into the executive suite. In doing so, she had created something he could never achieve through manipulation and intimidation. Sustainable success built on authentic human connection and shared purpose. 1 year after that fateful anniversary dinner at Bellissimo, I stood at the podium accepting the Seattle Business Journal's Executive Leader of the Year award. The ballroom was filled with industry leaders, many of whom had initially dismissed Meridian's ethical transformation as idealistic and unsustainable. Now they watched as our success metrics were displayed on giant screens. Revenue up 37%, employee retention improved by 42%, and client satisfaction at record levels. Conventional wisdom tells us that business requires ruthlessness, I began, surveying the audience. That vulnerability is weakness, that ethics are luxury items to be discarded when inconvenient. Today, I want to challenge that narrative with evidence, not ideology. From my position on stage, I could see the faces of Meridian's leadership team, people who had evolved from skeptical colleagues to true partners in transformation. I could also see Robert, seated at a table near the back, his expression carefully neutral. Virotech had recently announced his departure after less than 6 months, another corporate culture that had recognized the toxicity beneath the polished facade. A year ago, I experienced a devastating personal betrayal, I continued, choosing transparency rather than professionally sanitized distance. My husband of 10 years brought his mistress to our anniversary dinner, then informed me he'd left me with financial ruin before dismissing me as too soft for real success. A murmur went through the audience. The personal story behind the professional transformation was known to many, but rarely acknowledged so directly. That moment of cruelty could have broken me. Instead, it became the foundation for rebuilding, not just my personal life, but an entire corporate culture. What my former husband failed to understand is that genuine strength doesn't come from hardening ourselves against vulnerability, but from transforming painful experiences into purposeful creation. The metrics on the screen transitioned to images of Meridian's transformed workspace, collaborative environments where teams worked across traditional boundaries, the flattened organizational structure that distributed leadership responsibilities more broadly, the community initiatives that connected our success to broader social impact. The qualities dismissed as soft in traditional business environments, empathy, integrity, collaborative spirit, have proven to be our greatest competitive advantages. They've attracted exceptional talent, fostered innovation that mechanical compliance never could, and built client relationships based on trust rather than transaction. As I accepted the award, I shared one final reflection. The true measure of resilience isn't how quickly we armor ourselves against pain, but how creatively we transform difficult experiences into positive impact. In both personal life and business, leadership. Our wounds can become sources of wisdom if we have the courage to learn from them rather than simply survive them. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for Meridian's financial results, but for the more profound transformation we represented. Proof that ethical leadership could create sustainable success without requiring the soul-depleting compromises that traditional corporate culture often demanded. Later that evening, as celebration wound down, Miranda found me on the terrace overlooking the city lights. "Robert left right after your speech," she noted. Looked rather shaken. I nodded, feeling neither satisfaction nor concern at this information. Perhaps he finally understood what I meant by strength. Looking out at Seattle's skyline, I felt profound gratitude for the journey of the past year. The betrayal that was meant to diminish me had instead revealed capacities I might never have discovered otherwise. The woman dismissed as too soft had created something powerful and lasting, not despite her supposed softness, but because of the authentic strength it contained. The transformation was never about proving Robert wrong. It was about creating something right, a model of leadership where success and humanity reinforced rather than opposed each other. In that creation, I had discovered not just professional purpose, but personal wholeness. The dinner that was meant to end my story had instead become merely the first chapter of a far more meaningful narrative.